Welcome to Model and Grow Language Part 1. Thank you so much for joining us today.
But what we're going to be covering today is we're going to talk a little bit about communication. We're going to give some background. SLPs, we always want to know, why are we doing what we do? What's the evidence? What's the science behind our interventions? And for individuals that are in attendance that are not SLPs, this really gives a nice framework with the techniques that we're going to be going over today. So we're going to have that research, we're going to have some evidence, and then we're going to go through 6 techniques to improve communication. All right, so quick second, one of the things that I always like to do, whether we're doing an online or an in-person webinar, is to activate some reflections, make you think of maybe a client or a student, or perhaps your own child or loved one that has been done in intervention sessions to help increase communication. This does not have to be a specific therapeutic technique. Just think of something that was done. I like to have this start off the webinar because, again, when we're learning, we want to activate our background knowledge. We want to attach new knowledge to it. And then at the end, we'll wrap it up. But it really, a lot of times, will identify that people think of a technique that ends up being one of the ones that we cover today, and you or that person was doing something that maybe you didn't even realize was so strongly validated in the research, which is a really nice thing to be able to say, hey, what I was doing is, maybe something as a parent that seems just common sense, but it's actually very strongly supported. And yes, you can absolutely put some comments in the chat. That's awesome. That's great. I'm not going to address them right now because we are going to be getting into those techniques, some of the ones that you guys are putting in there, which is fantastic. All right, so as a host for this webinar, my goal is I always try to approach designing and implementing webinars in a way that if I was in attendance, I would want to be able to walk out feeling empowered and ready to go. So you're going to see these techniques listed to you several times because my goal is for you to be able to leave this hour, and instead of needing to go back and look at your notes and look at your handouts before you can actually start to implement them, to have them already pretty strongly cemented in your mind. So there is a reason, there's a method to the madness. I'm not just repeating myself because it's Monday and I didn't have coffee, which I did because that wouldn't be smart, right? But it's to hopefully, again, have this so that you are, boom, up and running straight out of the gate with these techniques. All right, so here are the first showing of them, and we're going to go through each of these, and I'm also going to show you videos with each of these being implemented because we're all different learners. Some of us learn best just by seeing a list like this, and others learn by actually seeing it implemented, and that helps you actually be able to do it. So the first one is using aided AAC models or aided language. So I saw a couple of people in the chat put that as a comment. That's excellent. That's exactly what we want to be doing. And we'll talk a little bit more in depth on what that looks like when we get through this technique. Providing wait time, which if you're a clinician, you may refer to this as expectant delay, which is one of the most powerful techniques that we can use, and yet it's also one of the most difficult or uncomfortable to start to implement, especially when you're first getting used to it. Asking WH questions, that's our third technique, which again seems pretty simple and basic, but if we don't think about our WH questions and really plan them in advance, the typical response when asking questions tends to be to keep it a little basic. And so we end up asking yes, no, or 2-choice questions. So we really want to ask these open-ended WH questions to promote that language development. And then we provide answers for those. So 3 and 4 are kind of paired together for this webinar. For part 2, you're going to see that I actually split them apart a little bit more, and we talk about them in a little bit of a different framework. So if you attend part 2 in 2 weeks, you'll see that again. Technique 5 is providing a prompt. This can be verbal and or physical, and we'll talk about scaffolding of those prompts as well to really promote independence. And then Technique 6 is increasing responsivity. As a clinician, we are trained in this through our educational programs and our master's degrees and things like that, but we sometimes can take this a little too far into our own agenda. So we're going to talk about what does this look like and how can we really start to promote that independence. So some research here to support the framework. When we talk about some typical traits of individuals that use AAC, and this is across ages, across genders, as well as across types of AAC, low, mid, and high tech. We know that they know more than they can say. That's basically why we're fitting them with an AAC solution, is because we know cognitively, linguistically, they have so much more to say that for some reason or another, their natural speech mechanism is not allowing them to actually be able to produce that. We also know they can be passive communicators, which means they tend to kind of sit back and let their communication partners, their speaking communication partners, take the dominant role in communication. Now, this we'll talk about in just a second, but this is often really exacerbated by us, by the communication partners. And so these techniques kind of help flip that around. We don't want them to be passive. We really want them to be active and initiating. We know that they communicate for a limited number of reasons or purposes. A lot of times, again, this is perpetuated by the communication partner because of the types of questions that we ask, because of the types of linguistic functions that we focus on in therapy. When you think about fitting someone with an AAC device, sometimes we can get so excited in the beginning that they have this device and, oh my goodness, they're using it really well. And we end up focusing on wants and needs. We don't necessarily focus on social closeness or building relationships or expressing important opinions. So we want to make sure that we are not pigeonholing them into these types of purposes for communication. And then we also know that they tend to use quite restricted grammar and syntax. So one of the things as a speech language pathologist that we look at is this development of a complex syntax over time. And we don't see that same development when we're talking about individuals that use AAC. And again, that falls on our shoulders, especially as clinicians. This is something we must be working on morphemes. We must be working on complex structures, both morphologically and syntactically. So when we think about these traits of individuals that use AAC, now we're going to turn the mirror on ourselves, which can sometimes be uncomfortable. But again, one of my favorite phrases is people don't know what they don't know. And what I mean by that in this type of a setting is that if you don't realize that you're doing something, even if you have the best interest of your client or your child at heart, if you're not aware that you're doing something that actually hinders their growth, then you don't know to stop it. So looking at our own actions is never a comfortable thing, especially as an adult, but it's how we're going to make change. It's how we're going to allow our clients to be able to be more independent and active communicators. So we know, based on research, and this is proven time and time again, that communicative partners take the majority of the turns. We do most of the talking. Okay, that's not necessarily a good thing, especially as we want our clients to be more independent. We provide few opportunities for linguistic growth and support. I'll give you some examples of these when we get into the techniques. We interrupt. If you've ever had the opportunity to watch yourself, I know speech language pathologists that are here, when you go through graduate school, you get a chance to watch yourself on your your clinical videos and such, your feedback, your supervisors go through that with you. If it's been a while since you've been in grad school, like in my case, then take a chance and get permission and see if you can video a session and don't try to change anything. See what you do. You'll be shocked. I know I was at how often you interrupt because we kind of get what they're saying. We know what message they're trying to build, and life is busy. Things are moving so fast. And so we just kind of go, okay, I'm just going to, move it along. I know what you're trying to say. And we only have 2 minutes left of this session. So let's just go. But that's not helping. That's actually causing more damage. And then we focus on the tech and not the client. And this is by far, hands down, the number one thing that I work with new clinicians with AAC is they will say, okay, I know this client needs a solution, but I'm not familiar with the technology, so I don't know what to do. Or I haven't done anything for a year because I haven't had a chance to learn everything that's out there. You don't have to. Your goals are still going to be linguistic. They're going to be focusing on their operations and social and strategic use of being able to communicate. So the focus is not on the tech. The focus is on the language and communicative development of the client, which usually as clinicians takes a lot of pressure off. Like, okay, I know what to do in that regard. You let the consultants be able to help you with the technology. All right, so we're going to get into a little bit of the research here before we talk about these techniques, because it's important to know, obviously for my SLPs, and I'm sure my OTs and my PTs, when you're looking for evidence, we always try to match what fits our client. So obviously that may not always be possible, but the good news is with this research, with these techniques, they've been used across all types of different communication partners, all types of demographic groups. I've given you a couple of names there to look at. Specifically, I would pay close attention to Drs. Jennifer Kent Walsh and Dr. Kathy Binger. They are colleagues. They do quite a bit of publication together, and the bulk of their career has been dedicated to researching communication partners. Jennifer Kent Walsh was one of my mentors. She knows this stuff inside and out. They have always been also been studied across contexts. So when life kind of allows for groups again, it's really nice to know that these have been studied not only in small groups, like in maybe group therapy in a school system, but in larger groups such as summer camps, as well as one-on-one when we've got intervention done across environments like homes, schools, outpatient clinics, university clinics, and then across diagnoses. So those are just a few of the diagnoses. That is not an inclusive list of every type of diagnosis that's been studied, but that's really nice to know that our evidence casts a wide net when we're saying this is why we're going to focus on these baseline techniques here to really, again, kind of switch things up, especially if we have a client that maybe has been using AAC for a while and is kind of stuck in that passive role. All right, so before we get into the techniques, this is the type of low-tech board that I'm going to be modeling on in the video. And again, you can download this from saltillo.com. If you haven't taken a look at Saltillo's website, I highly encourage you to do so. There's quite a few low-tech resources that are available online, this being one of them. It's a 96 location core board. So this is great if if you're moving around, going classroom to classroom, and this is really all that you can carry, especially something that can be laminated and wiped down really easily as you move around. This could be a really great solution for you. So you're going to see me modeling with that. And again, you can blow it up. We've seen people put it on their playgrounds. We've seen all kinds of uses for them. So that is available to you on our website. And if you're not familiar with how our WordPower or our core language files are organized, they're loosely based off of the Fitzgerald color coding scheme. So your pronouns are in yellow, verbs in green, and they tend to follow this same type of flow pattern where pronouns are on the left, verbs are in the middle, prepositions and adverbs, etc., go on the right. And on the top, we have a lot of categories, some quick access categories. So again, that's WordPower. Whether you have a client that's using WordPower 20 or WordPower 60, you're going to see this same type of layout. All right, so our techniques, again, hopefully you're going to have all 6 of these ingrained by the time we're done. Aided modeling, expectant delay, asking and answering WH questions, providing some type of prompt, and then responding to their turns. So the first one is modeling, aided AAC modeling. We have a couple of different terms, but it's basically providing a model of using the technology. So the communication partner is using the board or the NovaChat as they are communicating with the person using the device. So a lot of times this is something that, again, we may, as speech language pathologists, learn in school. And so we kind of take it for granted that everyone understands what it means when we say, oh, just model. Well, that's easier said than done. And as a parent, I may go, okay, all right, but not be modeling how you, the clinician, may really want me to model. So the way that I explain it is, this device is a tool. It's not this magic fix-all of a sudden we turn it on and our client is going to be communicating, boom, off and running. They have to learn where the words are stored. They have to learn how to build morphologically complex words. And as you program more, that learning continues. Well, it's the same thing for the communication partners. We have to learn where things are. And in order to best learn, we have to use the technology. So it doesn't mean that we don't speak. It means that we do both, but we're using the technology so that it's a shared communication. Nicholas, yes, there is a recording of the webinar and it will be posted on our website. Thank you for asking. So they use the board to communicate. One of my favorite things to do and to teach, especially educators, is download our chat editor software and put it on your computer in your classroom and then display it on your smart board if you have this. Then you can do aided modeling for the entire class, even if your student that's using a NovaChat or TouchChat isn't right next to you. You don't have to be standing there using their device. So this is a very powerful technique. It's something that's very simple. It also doesn't mean you have to model every single word that you say. So in the beginning, I will tell parents, pick one word. It can be the beginning, it can be the WH word that you're asking as a question, it can be the noun in the sentence, whatever it is, but it doesn't have to be every single word. A lot of times, if we just say, model what you're saying with the device, other individuals will think, oh my gosh, I have to find every single word that I'm trying to say on the device. I can't go that fast. It slows it down. And so they quit. It's not an all or nothing. Okay. All right. So let's take a look. This is a video, what I have done here, and you'll see the same type of video across all of the modeling techniques here. I have used, and this is a great resource, tarheelreader.org. It's out of the University of North Carolina, hence Tar Heel Reader. And what they have is a variety of low-tech, very simple types of books. And what you can do is take the chat editor software and gloss those books like I've done here, and you'll see it in action in a moment, with our symbols so that the text and the symbols are there. I can provide aided modeling right there in the story. And then I'm also going to use my core board for the purposes of this webinar. Now I am talking to you now with my headphones. So give me just a moment. I'm going to disconnect those and play this video so that you all can hear the audio in it.
Okay, so for our first video, I'm going to show you what modeling looks like. So I've got a sample book here. It's called Going on a Picnic, and it has been glossed, meaning that I have put different examples of symbols that you could use for each page, and each page has been combined onto this single sheet here for ease of this. And then over here to the other side, I've got our 96 location low tech board that I'm going to use to model certain steps here for you. Now, this board is a little bit more complex than perhaps the device or the board that your child or student is using. But since I'm just modeling for you today, I wanted to use a more complex one. You can do this modeling feature with any board at all, whether it's 4 items or over 100, it doesn't matter. So let's pan back over here. And I want to show you what it looks like. Here I have going on a picnic, and it's got a visual, and I've got it glossed with go and eat. So when we're reading and we're modeling, you might say something like, today we're going to read about going on a picnic. And what I would model would say, go. And then I might ask a question, because over here we're talking about a picnic. I might say, oh, we're going to go and we're going to eat on a picnic. So I am modeling not only what is written on the page, but also having some dialogue in there, and I'm modeling that dialogue. We pan back over. Our next page says, we will spend some time with good friends. And if I was modeling, I could even put we, or I could put time, as I've modeled on our book here, or I could say something like a comment like, that will make me very happy to spend time with friends on a picnic. The next page shows, we'll pack a lunch, and I have we and a. So we could model those, or I could come over here and I could model part of my dialogue. If I wanted to be simple with what I have on my board, I could come over here and say, we will pack a lunch. So I'm simply pointing to an item that is either on the text of the book that I'm reading, or I'm using a comment, I'm creating a dialogue, and I'm modeling whatever it is that I choose to say for that question or comment.
Okay, so hopefully for my visual learners, that helps you see it in action. Okay, I see a comment here about sharing the link to the book. That was tarheelreader.org. So I'm not able to type in the chat window just yet, but I will, hopefully that will come through, tarheelreader.org. Okay, so our next technique is pausing or expectant delay. Now, the point of this, oh, thank you, Camber. She just typed it in the chat window if you were looking for that link. Now, the point of expectant delay or pausing is to give a communication opportunity. Again, we already talked about the fact that one of the characteristics of individuals that are communication partners is we take the majority of communicative turns. We do most of the talking. Well, if we give them time, if we give our clients or our children time, we start to change that expectation that they have that, well, she's just going to keep on talking so I can sit here and be quiet. We give that opportunity. We also allow for additional processing time. Sometimes we ask questions that take a second to think through. So if we move on super fast, our clients haven't even finished thinking about what we asked before we're asking another question. And then again, it sets that expectation of, I said something, now it's your turn. This dialogue, this reciprocity of communication, turn taking that we go back and forth and back and forth. Now there is a method. It's not just sitting back and kind of looking at your watch and going, okay, you know, I'll wait. It's, again, expectant delay. So we have this look of, I'm waiting, it's your turn. So we maintain eye contact. We provide an expectant facial expression, which means we might raise our eyebrows a little bit or make a face like, I wonder what you think. And then we provide increased pause time. So the question that is always asked is, well, how long? And my beginning kind of rule of thumb is count to 10 slowly in your head. So when I go through this, especially with people doing it for the first time, so it might be grad students or clinicians that have never practiced this, or parents, we will practice this because 10 seconds, 10 actual seconds, not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, feels really long, especially when you're sitting there with a client, that it can feel like an eternity. So we practice this. If you can tell that the communication partner is thinking of something to say, or they're processing what you just said, give them more time. It's not like this magic bell that goes ding, 10 seconds, got to move on. Just let them have more time. Everybody, remember, human beings are dynamic. Everybody's going to be a little different. Maybe on Monday, they are all cylinders go and they're firing really quickly, but maybe by Thursday, things are a little slower. That's okay. But we want to be giving this expectant delay. So here's our example with this. I'm not sure why this icon keeps bouncing. I don't know if you guys can see that, but I'm afraid to touch it. So I'm going to just let it bounce. I apologize if you can see that and it's bothering you.
So here we are, and I'm going to show you how to pause or demonstrate expectant delay. And this may seem something that sounds really easy and natural, and yet it hands down can be one of the hardest different techniques to master. So we're using our same book and our same 96 location page. And while we are reading, we can pause either after we read the text. We will spend some time with good friends. And of course, we model on our board. Instead of going right to the next one, to the next page, or turning the page or moving right along, we're going to pause. Now, people will say, how long do I pause? And that is going to vary by every single client. A really good baseline or starting point would be to count to 10 slowly in your head. So trying the old school, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, but looking at the child or the client and judging, are they processing what you've said and what you've read? Are they looking at the symbols on the book? Are they looking at the symbols on the page or the device and trying to think of a response or a comment? Because if they are, you want to give them more time. So this may be longer or shorter than 10 seconds. And typically, as you go, the pause time gets less and less as our clients move from a very passive communicator to an active communicator. So here's what it might look like. If I were to say something like, we will pack a lunch, and I come over and I comment, I love to have a picnic lunch. Instead of moving along and asking a question immediately or making a comment, I'm going to wait. That was 10 seconds. Now that may have seemed like a very long time. And you know what? When you're in the moment, it is. But it's really not that long when we're asking a client to really process what we've said and think about what we're showing them as far as on our page and in our book.
All right, so that is technique 2. Now technique 3, asking WH questions. Again, this is to promote that higher level communication. So we don't want to be stuck on yes, no, or 2 choice questions. And a lot of times we find that if we don't plan what we're going to say, that's exactly what happens. We revert back to these very simple questions when we know asking these open-ended questions allows for a lot more communication. It promotes that advancement of language development, and it's what we do naturally. If we look at how children develop language, it's what happens as they grow and their language becomes more and more complex. So we want to be doing the same thing with our clients. Now, in the handouts that are also in the videos, what I did was I made sure that the books I chose had WH questions. What might we need to buy at the store to eat? And then what I like to do is include those WH words as the words that I'm glossing in the story, or if I don't have a glossed book, the words that I'm modeling because those oftentimes are, again, when we think about core language, the words that they're going to be able to use across settings, across communication partners, across contexts, just so powerful. And yet they oftentimes get skipped because they're WH words and we kind of overlook them for, like fancier words, or for lack of a better term. So we've got that there, and we want to be thinking about those WH, who, what, where, when, why, how. Now, technique 4 goes in combination, because a lot of people will say, that's great, Melissa, ask WH questions. My client doesn't answer them. They're happy in that passive role. They're happy as a clam and they're not moving. So I just stopped asking WH questions. Well, that's not the response that we as clinicians want to do. We actually want to answer those WH questions. Think of it like this. When we have a young child that is learning language, we may, and I always give an example with my own child. When my oldest, well, any of my kids, but especially I remember with my oldest, I would load him into the car and we'd be going to Target, and he was, 9 months, a year old, something like that. And I'd be talking to him, where are we going to go? What are we going to buy? Who are we going to see? Things like that. He wouldn't answer me. He was too young. He was in that passive language learning, absorbing role. But I would answer, we're going to go to Target. We have to get milk, or whatever it was. And it's that modeling of a question is asked, a question is answered. So we want to make sure that we're doing this. We teach that question and answer format. So if you pose a WH question and your client doesn't answer, we don't just move on. We actually provide a model of that answer. And remember, we're tying in that aided language modeling as well. So we're using both our speech and our device. So you see here, we answer the question. What might we need to buy was the question from the past slide. Fruit sounds good, and just one thing is modeled. Again, we don't have to model every single word. So I've given the symbol for good, and maybe I would model that as well on the device. So here it is in action.
So this technique I've mentioned in our other 2 videos about asking questions, but we really want to make sure that when we are asking questions, we are asking open-ended, meaningful questions that really require more of a response than a simple yes or no, that really require our client to think about it. And again, we want to move them from being a passive communicator to an active communicator. So asking these open-ended WH questions is a wonderful way to do that. Now, in your text, when you are looking at these samples here, you may notice that some of the items have a WH question already in the text, like this one. What might we need to buy at the store to eat? So we can model that very easily over here. We can provide that pausing and expectant delay. And we've asked our what question right off the bat. But what about when we are having a conversation or reading a book that does not have a WH question in the text? Something like this, fruit sounds good. That's just a comment. That's an observation. And while we can model that over here about being good, we really can follow up with a WH question like, what fruit should we get? Or where is the best place to get fruit? Or when can I get a grapefruit? Something like that, that really allows for more advanced, in-depth thinking, and again, just expands that language and allows for more conversation. It doesn't have to be included as text on a book, and it doesn't have to be the same WH questions every time. Now, if they don't answer your WH question, and you've given them plenty of time to pause and process, you can tell that that's not the case, you don't just want to leave that question unanswered. Go ahead and model that questions answer. So if we were to do this one, what might we need to buy at the store to eat? We could come over here and we could answer that question. Well, we would need to buy food. And so we may have to navigate into another page, or we could say something like, we will need to get something to eat like oranges or grapefruit. If we are over here and we ask, or we read this page, fruit sounds good, and I ask a question, what kind of fruit should we get? And I don't get an answer, I might then answer that for my client and say, oh, I know what fruit I'm gonna get. I love grapefruit. Let's get some of that. So you don't wanna just leave that WH question that you've posed there open and hanging unanswered. Go ahead and model the way to answer that correctly. Give that complex language model, and then we can move on.
So one of my favorite tips to share during this portion is the use of Post-it notes. I swear that's one of the best inventions ever. But if you are doing a shared storybook reading activity, whether it's in therapy or at home, it doesn't really matter, you have to really think through these questions beforehand. So if you open up the book and you take a look at the character and the storyline and you think about, all right, what WH question will I ask on this page? Write it down on that Post-it note and then put the Post-it note right there on the page so that when you're in the moment and you're reading the book with the client, you're having a conversation, you don't go, oh, what was that question I was going to ask? Or you're not coming up with something on the spot. I would strongly recommend doing that because it makes sure that, again, you don't fall back into that trap of, I forgot what I was just going to ask, so I'll just ask a yes, no, or a two choice question. All right. Number 5 is modeling. So modeling with a prompt is going to be with a verbal or with a physical prompt. And this is providing an indication of what they're supposed to do. So again, as clinicians, we learn about scaffolding. We learn about those supports that we slowly remove as our clients become more and more independent. I always relate it to the gym. You know, if you go to the gym and your goal is to bench press 100 pounds, you don't sit down and start trying to bench press 100 pounds right away. You work up to it, but you always have someone that's behind you. That's your scaffold, that's your spotter, that's your support. That's what a prompt is. It's this support to, again, give an indication of what is supposed to happen. Now, the thing with prompts is we want to remove them once our client is becoming more and more independent. And sometimes as clinicians, we get stuck continually giving prompts. So it's something that you always want to be aware of. You want to keep your prompts brief. So if it's a verbal one, you want to give 2 to 3 words. You want to keep it short. If you use something that's a little longer, it's very specific. Use your Nova Chat. Show me on your device. If you're looking to expand their utterances specifically into multi-symbol utterances, you might say, show me 2. Show me 2 buttons, something like that. You can ask an open-ended question like, do you have something to say, or is it your turn? But start with those direct, brief instructions first. Now, physical prompts, again, if the verbal prompts aren't working and they need more support, they need more scaffolding, you can mix in a physical prompt. Again, providing assistance with what they're supposed to do. It could be something like hand under hand. It could be something even less, like gesturing towards the device or towards the board. Depending on the setting that you're in, you may provide hand over hand. Every setting is going to have their own guidance for you on whether they want over or under. And it could also be something as simple as tapping them on the shoulder or the arm. Some of our clients need that tactile cue of it's your turn, and that's totally okay to do that. But that's also something you can scaffold. If you're going hand underhand, let's see if we can scaffold to touching the elbow, and then afterwards scaffold less and just go with a gesture. But if we need to have prompts, again, to get them to be in this more active role, then let's go ahead and let's do that. We just don't want to be using prompts forever.
Okay, so we are on step number 5 for our 5th technique. And now what we want to do is provide a verbal prompt. So we have shown that modeling, we've given a pause or expectant delay, we've asked and answered some WH questions, and sometimes we still need to provide some type of prompt. So a verbal or a physical prompt is totally okay to provide that if we need to. You may find that you need to do this a little bit more in the beginning, just because, again, we're moving from that passive to active communicator status. So we've been modeling with this book, and maybe you're down here, fruit sounds good, and you've asked a question and you've answered it, and you can tell that they're thinking, and so you can say, you show me, or show me on your Nova chat, or point to 1, or it's your turn, show me 2. Those types of verbal prompts are sometimes very necessary. Sometimes, for whatever reason, people may feel like they need permission to use their own device. Perhaps it's new, perhaps they're in a new environment, and unfortunately, sometimes perhaps people have even used a device as a reinforcement and taken it away and then brought it back. And so they feel like they need permission. That's okay. Give them a verbal prompt to show. And then I also just demonstrated a physical prompt. So showing them on here where it is and what you can push, or a physical prompt of touching their hand, tapping them on the top of the hand, moving their hand over, or touching their elbow or their shoulder. Those types of physical prompts are okay. We don't want to have total hand over hand where you are guiding their hand, but hand under hand can work. Or again, if you, in the very beginning, are modeling something very basic, that's when you would go hand over hand. But for this type of physical prompt, it's more of a reminder to use the device, use their low-tech system, whichever it is that they're using, to answer the question and participate in the conversation.
Okie dokie. So technique 6, our last one, is increased responsivity. And this is really to reinforce our clients' communication attempts and then expand their utterances. So again, I'm going to show you or talk to you through an example, just like with a child developing spoken language. We provide these expansions and extensions, but we don't see that happen a lot of the times in AAC. And that's what we want to do. If we're responding to them, we want to provide that expansion or extension to, again, grow that language and really reinforce their communication attempts. If they feel like they are being heard, if they are not being interrupted, then they are going to, again, become more and more active. So the way that we do this is we provide appropriate and consistent responses to their messages. Now, let me be the first to say, I'm a parent. I totally know that life gets busy, and using techniques, you know, kind of in a clinician type of setting in a little bubble is one thing, and then using these types of things at home when the house is very busy around you is a whole nother thing. So again, give yourself some grace. It is not an all or nothing. If you get to the end of the day and you go, oh my gosh, I was really great with techniques 1 through 3 today, but technique 6, I really need to work on. That's okay, because again, we're all works in progress here. But we want to make sure that we are responding and not doing something like, oh, you picked green beans for your vegetable? You hardly ever pick green beans. I don't think you really meant that. I think you meant to pick corn, which is right next to it. So we're just going to go with that. We want to respond. If it's an inaccurate selection, if we respond and say, really, you want green beans today? Okay, I'll go get that. Chances are they're going to let us know, like, no, that's not what I wanted. Hold the phone. Give me a second to try again. But we're showing that we've acknowledged, we've heard, we're not just overriding their communication attempts. So this last video is actually a clinician working with a child with the NovaChat, and she's really merging all of these techniques, but she's responding to the client as well. So let me show you this.
All right. So, okay, when I'm feeling hungry, it's best to keep clear. That's for sure. He's eating the deer, right? Can you tell me eat? Look at that. He's squeezing him so he can eat him. Eat is right here. Let's go. What would you like for me to do? No. Okay, all right.
So that's a really nice way to kind of put a bow on it and see all of the techniques in action there. I'm going to advance to the next slide so that you guys have one more visual with these 6, and I'm going to answer Emily's question in the chat. If you can't see it, she asked, can you explain how you would use a Tar Heel reader book and the 96 icon visual at the same time on a smart board? So Emily, that's going to depend on the setup that you have in your classroom, but the Tar Heel reader books, a lot of them are in PowerPoint format. So if you can do a split screen, you can then, yes, show both at the same time, or you can show one slide on the PowerPoint at a time and then switch over. Another option would be to create booklets, which is what I did for this example. I just put all 6 PowerPoint slides on one page so that it was easier to model on the video across pages of the book. But you absolutely could put something, you know, on a printed format, laminate it, things like that if you wanted to. All right, so what do we do next? As I mentioned at the beginning, these techniques and this first hour of our webinar is part 1 in a 2-part series. So this is great. We get using, we're doing, you know, we're rocking and rolling with these 6 techniques. Our clients are becoming more active. What's the next step? As clinicians, we're constantly thinking about moving our client forward. It's that zone of proximal development that's hopefully always shifting and moving, so that means their language is growing. So one of the things that we want to do to really move our clients to the quote unquote next level is to incorporate these 2 types of strategies. And we do this, at least in this webinar, through the use of shared storybook reading, which, I mean, shared storybook reading from a clinical standpoint is just one of the most powerful intervention techniques when we're talking about language and literacy. But it also gives you a fantastic framework to start from, because it's one thing to go, okay, I got these 6 steps, I got these 2 techniques and strategies, like I'm ready to go. And then you put a client in front of you, and sometimes it doesn't go as nicely and neatly as we learned in the webinar, because that's life. That's just being a human being. So part 2, which happens in 2 weeks online, another Monday at 12 noon Eastern, we'll work on these next 2 areas, and we'll do a review of the 6 techniques as well, so that hopefully by then you've had some time to start implementing them again, whether it's at home or in your practice. So we have just a couple of minutes left. I'd like to open it up for questions. You can type it in the chat window. And while I'm watching for those to come in, I'm going to review a couple of resources for you. So You've seen Camber typed in the chat window, the tarheelreader.org already. And then saltillo.com I referenced a few times. That's where you can find, again, several low-tech boards. You can also find our chat editor software, which allows you to download all of the vocabularies, put it on your computer, use it to print out low-tech boards, use it to, again, display on a smart board. If you have like a Microsoft Surface tablet, you can even use that as a way to model language. It's full of resources. It's also got quick reference guides. It's got recorded webinars from the past. It's got video tutorials. If perhaps you've shown someone how to edit a button several times, send them this video, allow them to do it on their own time and, you know, kind of practice. We also have a NovaChat group on Facebook, which is wonderful. Even if you are a clinician, feel free to join that. You'll see a lot of different resources and really cool ideas as well. We also have you'll see the Facebook, the Twitter. We have a YouTube channel as well. There's so much content that we've been uploading to the YouTube channel, different guest webinars, but also things about like our book of the month and ways to implement literacy activities with our calendar for the year. There's just oodles of information on there. And then here's my contact information as well. Please feel free, especially if you're in my area in Florida, email me. Let's set up a time to go through any questions that you may have. We can do remote visits as well as in person. And then of course you have our online support on saltillo.com, technical support. So if you're needing help with something and you can't get a hold of me, or you live in a different geographical area, please feel free to check that out. I have not seen any questions come in the chat window, so that hopefully is a good thing. But if you have questions that you haven't been able to type into the chat window, please feel free to email me. I'm more than happy to take some time to answer that for you. And I really hope to see you guys back here in 2 weeks for part 2. Thank you so much for spending an hour with us today.